knowledge to counter mapping, all sorts of things that really pointed us towards place-based learning. So at first it was a huge obstacle, and for us, like, really, I thought we were going to just write about our own experience, using place-based learning, but I think it made the work stronger.
My colleagues definitely hit upon the two biggest challenges for us. Yeah. And what I expected to be a challenge, kind of melding our three voices, really didn't turn out to be a challenge at all. It sounds like it was written with one voice, and that was more just our styles than it was the editing process. Now I read it and I get super confused. I'm like, did I write that chapter? I don't think I wrote that chapter. Like, oh, that's really good. I wish I had written that.
And that was very beautiful to me. That moment of kind of friction between, older research and validating, our collective experience and what we knew through experience, while also it gave us an opportunity in a lot of spaces and moments in the book to say, no, we're still going to lean into this older, date-wise research because of the very fact that it gives us the opportunity to be the thing we say in terms of like decolonizing curricula and honoring, ways of knowing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be bound again to time.
Identify your general why. Why do you want that? Because you want to be more loving, you want to just be more giving and more uplifting. Why knowledge matters. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Micki Evans, Charity, Marcella Moran, and Erin Sanchez to the show. And I'm so excited to talk about their newly published book, Place-Based Learning, published by Solution Tree 2023. A truly game changer when it comes to place-based learning. And I have to be honest, I will use this book greatly in order to improve my practice when it comes to place-based learning. So first and foremost, congratulations for this outstandingly written and helpful book. It's not just really meaningful, but it's also at the same time as practical. And that's what we want to have. So welcome, Charity, Erin, and Micki to the show. It's such a treat to have you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now, just quickly for our viewers and listeners, who is Charity Moran, Erin Sanchez, and Micki Evans? So let's start with Micki, but just very important, just in one sentence.
I'm a passionate educator and an advocate for all students, all learners.
Erin.
I'd say an educator for social justice and a mom, and I'll leave the and hanging there.
Very good.
And Charity Moran. I am a lover of deep and new experiences.
That is beautiful. And, I truly,
That was
too,
tough.
I love lovers. And I think you are all in one way or another lovers. So let's really dive into the book. But first and foremost, what I find very interesting is the way you met each other, because I know that you actually don't live very close to each other. So just tell me a little bit about how it came all about that you three met and ultimately decided to write place-based learning together. Charity. Please, Charity Moran.
Oh, I was gonna say that's really a Micki. Micki is the originator of this and the kind of orchestrator of kind of keeping the cows herding in the right direction along the way. Yeah. So Micki, really, you tell, you tell.
So, so for me, I came across place-based learning through my own education, and that was after getting kicked out of two high schools. And I was just really thinking learning is not for me. And I ended up in an alternative school, referred to as a dropout school. And there were three teachers who had all read the Foxfire books and took us out into the community doing place-based journeys. And it changed my life. It really changed my life. And from there, I decided I wanted to be a teacher. The reason we're so passionate about place based learning is because it's the idea of connecting students to their place and their community and allowing these different narratives to emerge, and not being crowded out by the dominant narrative.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think you nailed it when it comes to connection. And I think that's what we all somehow strive in our lives, right? We want to have meaningful connection, right? Because really meaning comes really from connection, right? As Steve Jobs once said, we can only connect the dots looking backwards, right? And by doing so, we can actually start connecting the dots. And that's also with people, right? And so, thank you so much, because that's what education ought to be. So, let's dive a little bit into it. So, when did you start thinking about place born learning and especially writing a book, together three people? Different ways of thinking, because that's a huge challenge. Of course, you are just mentioning Micki, and thank you so much for being so vulnerable and really showing your background, because this really comes through in this book. It's really authentic, and we need those kind of voices, because that's how it ultimately sticks, and we can relate to, and we can really start looking at place based learning, but also alternative learning, or whatever you want to call it. To me, there's nothing like special education. I think we are all, to some extent, special education, because every one of us is special, and I think this is so helpful what you're doing. So just please start and give us a taste of who initiated actually writing the book and how did it unfold. It might have been a very messy process, isn't it?
Well, the question of who initiated it is not messy. That one's really easy. That was definitely Micki. Uh, and then Charity, and lastly me. It was Micki saying every time we got together, every time we'd have a call or be in person, she'd be like, we have to write a book about this. Just because of our experiences, and then also like this void that existed between the project based work that we were immersed in professionally, and then the place based work where our hearts were, and where our teaching experience was. And, we found it that no one was bridging that void. And so, yeah, Micki kept pushing, saying, what do you think? Like, let's look at an outline. What might an outline look like? And then Charity would help us dream big and be like, why does it even have to look like an outline? And I just follow along as best. But I think a big part of it was really uh, coming to an understanding that the book was necessary. Like if it was necessary for us, it was also going to be necessary for teachers, who were teaching students in, rural, urban, uh, reserves, wherever their place was, that they were wanting what we had to say as well.
Mhm. Yeah, so we started writing blogs about different things, different excursions that we were taking and professional development and learning experiences that we were hosting for teachers, and those kind of set the stage for the pieces that went out. I was like, okay, so this can convert into some chapters, and we're thinking about the ideas that we were discussing in the blog and what makes it practical for not just teachers, but also the leaders and coaches supporting those teachers. So it was really delightful at the top of the podcast to hear you say that it was, practical and easy to be applied, though backed with research. Yes. Yeah, because I remember a call where I said, let's just pick some publishers and let's shoot a proposal out there. What are their proposal processes? And let's use that as a checklist and let's get started. Let's just do it. Because every time we met, like Erin was saying, it was like, we should write a book. We should. And so we wrote a book.
So let's be honest. Were there any obstacles or frustration that you faced? Because again, it's a really messy process. It's really different. It's just sometimes like, there are a lot of egos as well. I'm not saying that you have, this ego, but it's very different, right? Everyone writes a little bit differently. And, how did it unfold? How did you deal with frustration, if at all? But I also see that you're a very homogeneous group. It feels like you just got wonderfully along with each other somehow.
I like to lead with the fact that I have a very special relationship with time. So when it's time for deadlines and, yes, I can have this by that date. I try my darndest, I swear, but I live in between universes or something. So time, time is such a construct for me. So they were very gracious. At first and foremost, in terms of process, when it came to things like that. And we're really cool women, so it wasn't that hard to say, okay, hey, let's just try again later. We'll push it back. No worries. I think we heard enough no worries for everyone on the globe. So a
Well,
lot of that.
and I think what's kind of interesting is when we decided to go with a solution tree, we were just writing this book from our own experience and we didn't realize it needed to be research based. So all of a sudden that took us down a whole nother path of finding research that supports the whole notion behind place-based learning. And we pulled from a lot of different areas, from indigenous knowledge to counter mapping, all sorts of things that really pointed us towards place-based learning. So at first it was a huge obstacle, and for us, like, really, I thought we were going to just write about our own experience, using place-based learning, but I think it made the work stronger.
Do you have anything to add, Miss Sanchez?
Oh, I think my colleagues definitely hit upon the two um, biggest challenges for us. Yeah. And what I expected to be a challenge, kind of melding our three voices, really didn't turn out to be a challenge at all. It sounds like it was written with one voice, and that was more just our styles than it was the editing process. Now I read it and I get super confused. I'm like, did I write that chapter? I don't think I wrote that chapter. Like, oh, that's really good. I wish I had written that. No, but it didn't turn out to be much of an issue at all. But the research was a challenge, especially because, like I said, there is this void. And there's research that's really old, like all the way, back to Foxfire, like Micki was talking about. And then there's a small segment of newer, more cutting edge research around, decolonizing assessment practices, which we pull in, which made the text much stronger. than even our initial hope for it. But at first was very daunting because I haven't done research since grad school, a long time.
And that was very beautiful to me. That moment of kind of friction between older research and validating our collective experience and what we knew through experience, while also it gave us an opportunity in a lot of spaces and moments in the book to say no, we're still going to lean into this older date wise research because of the very fact that it gives us the opportunity to be the thing we say in terms of like decolonizing curricula and honoring, ways of knowing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be bound again to time. So that, while we just kind of held all three of those, in balance, and largely due to a lot of like Erin's critical eye and things of that sort. So like we really each came to the team with some unique properties that allowed us to be what we were writing. So we got to create what we wanted to see.
It also goes to show that usually, and we see this back usually in history, whether ancient religions usually, they already knew intuitively, certain things or a certain understanding they had before we actually had the scientific method of validating, right? And, of being able to measure things, right? And what I find really interesting here, what you just touched on, is to this, decolonization of certain ways of knowing, of certain ways of understanding the world. Like when it comes to Western science, it's always like, well, if it's measurable, then it's science. If it's not measurable, it's not science. On the other hand, you have indigenous science, which is if it's relational, it's science. If it's not relational, it is not science, right? So, and the two are just perfectly complementary. On the one hand, we have the more the details, and the other, it's just gives us somehow coherence, right? That puts all of it ultimately together, and then the acknowledgement of that the whole is greater than its parts, right? And I think that's so wonderful, really, to understand. And I want to ask you first, really, to give us a little bit context for who really did you write this book? Like, what kind of type of learner, and why do you think place-based learning can really enhance and uplift certain groups of people? Because you give very poignant examples, and which is still very much alive. We still face those issues in these days, right? It's tangible.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Charity.
I was just going to ask for a repeat of the question, just the last like 4 words, because I'm having a difficult time hearing. I apologize.
No, I am too, having a hard time hearing, and I don't know if it's because I'm on my phone. If you could speak just a little bit louder.
I would just check here. Is it better now?
You're still pretty quiet. Yeah.
Okay. So I turn it here, turn it off. So is it better now? So my
Maybe
question was
10% better.
basically, who did you write the book? Like, what are still some problems that some especially marginalized groups face today, and why does place-based learning really uplift their sense of being in the place?
So, I think it was twofold, threefold, maybe even more folded. Um, but we want to provide an opportunity for teachers to be able to tackle complex issues, social justice issues, issues around racism. and to give them a platform for that. And as part of that is if we're always working with the dominant narrative, we'll never hear those stories that marginalized students, disenfranchised students, might not connect with. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity for kids to identify their place and what their place stories are and how it connects to the community, connects to their gifts and talents, their ways of knowing.
Yeah, I think too about the teachers that all of us have worked with over the years that have felt very alone in their practice when they've tried to, really draw upon the assets of their students and take the time to connect with the community. And it maybe happens very rarely because of those structures that they're constantly pushing up against. And so in writing, we wanted teachers to feel less alone, to have a sense of community through place-based learning, and even, through the text and being able to connect with one another on it. I think, Charity, your work in Ghana right now speaks to that as well, of creating a community of educators who are not in it alone. And that's a very powerful part of the book, I think.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind was we wrote it for the unicorns, for ones who are, just like Erin said, doing this work and they need a little support or a little background research to justify when they go to, advocate for this type of learning in their spaces. And then also those who are curious, the ones who want to do it, or the leaders who want to support it and they just don't know where to start. So this kind of helps everyone.
So let's go a little bit
Learn.
more into place-based learning and really what it means. Give us a concrete example of how it looks like in a context such as yours, and what do you do, and what did you observe when it comes to students? How do they engage? How do they learn? And how does it differ from conventional, let's say, learning? Miss Eva Evans?
So one of the processes we use, it's called the pedagogy of the Griho, where we've used that process as story mapping for both educators, teachers, and students to go out and really interview the Grihos in their community and begin to uncover the stories of their community, both the challenges, the strengths, and looking at that as a starting point. And so you get buy-in from the students as well as teachers, and you begin to nurture and develop these community partnerships as part of the process. And so when kids feel, or young adults or students feel like their voice is being heard and that they're actually taking the time to work with a partner and co-create a community product that will that will improve the context within their community. I mean, it's hard to hold them back. They go. You can design this great project and all of a sudden it goes. Who knows where it goes, right? And that's the beauty of really empowering that student voice within place-based learning.
And it's hard too. I mean, we could give examples all day long, and every one of them is so unique because it's not just one context or one way that place-based learning looks, because it's shaped by the community, by the school, by the students. Like I think of the school that I started teaching in 24 years ago that was very place-based but self-directed, where students were designing projects from their own passions. And so one student, that might mean paddle boating down the Mississippi River doing water quality testing. And for another student, that may be, bringing their horse onto campus to demonstrate hippotherapy. And then you go across the country, because that was in Minnesota where I was raised, across the country to Washington State where I live now, and working with a school in Spokane, Washington, that served primarily Spokane Nation indigenous students. And their project looked like all of them going to hunting camp and hunting in their usual and accustomed places, and aligning that to content standards, but more than anything, drawing on their own ways of knowing and those cultural assets in order to learn, right? And each one of us can give multiple examples, and the thread throughout all of them, right, is community and cultural assets. And we can draw other through lines as well, but the experiences are so vastly different.
Miss Charity, do you have anything
Yes,
to
heavy
add?
on the assets. And I really love that about the work that we do in the book, and the discussions that we facilitate is not just about solving problems or rising to challenges in the community, but also amplifying where those assets are and the strengths, and the untold stories is often, and the counter narratives is often where we find that the bulk of that value.
And I think this is so important, right? Strength based. And that's why I really find it so helpful. It's a strength based education and looking at social issues, right? We look at the strength of a community, of an individual, and then really start, lifting these kind of things up, where then creativity and really engagements comes into the equation, where we can really make a difference. And in addition, I find also so helpful that you mentioned story, right? And that's how we see, right? We always make stories, right? And really it helps us really make meaning, right? Because we can only make meaning. And that's, to me, is why, in my view, oral traditions are so powerful, because they they do not write it down, but they tell a story. So it really appeals to our emotional center, the limbic system, right? And that's how we can put the dots together, and then it sticks, right? And I think that's so much missing right now in this kind of type of education, where we still, to some extent, overvalue, like, the just remembering facts, right? But that's maybe very helpful if you do like a test, but it doesn't tell us anything about the ability to think, the ability to think critically, and to the ability to think about issues, as you are talking about, complex issues, really true, in a thorough manner, which requires a lot of time. And as any skill, it requires a huge amount of rehearsal, right? It's just how it is. And so I find this is very important. You also mentioned the content standard. And I want to touch on that, because usually when we hear place based or project based, it's always like, oh, no time for this stuff. I have to cover all this kind of content and I don't have time. So therefore, we don't bother. But you really make the case beautifully. And it also made me somehow more kind of, it gives me more and more also the confidence to really also start uh, going more into place-based learning, because it's not easy. It takes incredible effort, incredible experience, and really ultimately wisdom. So it requires a lot also from teachers. That's not something that it's a one done. So it requires time, and I truly believe. And I want to have your input, please. Let me know what you think. I truly believe that, after 5 years or so in teaching, you become more and more confident. You kind of really, you're better and better. But it really takes at least 5 years to really get like kind of the experience, the confidence to really build up more and more. Of course, some are a little bit faster, but generally speaking, it takes time, right? It's the same thing. What happened to me too. There was always about 10 years I put really effort in something that I got really, really good at it. But it took me 10 years of 100% dedication in order to achieve certain things that I wanted to achieve. I think that's also very important. And I think, just generally speaking, everyone who is in teaching or in consulting or whatever, or in leadership, it takes time. It really takes time. And usually we don't really have it. We don't have this passion anymore because we are surrounded by this, to some extent, really fast world, right? There's just like immediate reward, right? So how do you see that? I want to have your response. So please, let's start with Miss Evans, and then go to Miss Sanchez, and then to Miss Moran.
Oh, you're muted.
I think a large part of it is trusting yourself and trusting the process. And most importantly, trusting your students and knowing your students well. That if we combine all of those, we begin to see what is truly important in education, right? And we're still aligning our work with the standards. We're still, showing evidence, but we're going far deeper than if you're just teaching the standards, right? So kids are making sense of it. They're developing skills that they'll use beyond school.
Yeah,
And
and I
oh,
would, something you said, Yannick, that I found so interesting was, like the the process of learning about place-based learning. It does take time, but it's more an unlearning. Like, it took every one of us on this screen at least 12 years to learn in this really strange, chopped up by discipline way that, that industrial education has built, um, which is so completely foreign to the way our minds work, the way our communities work, the way our cultures work, that if we just look outside of the education system at any project that we take on in our personal life, anything that we learn outside of schooling, it's like, oh, we'll apply that now to the classroom, and you've got place-based learning. So, it's helping teachers see that they already have that knowledge within them, right? They already have those skills of critical thinking and collaborating and communicating and storytelling, and it's all there. It just has to be rediscovered. And our educational system just isn't a great example of that.
And I think the rediscovering, but also it needs to be reframed, right? And that's what place-based learning asks us to do, is to really reframe our curriculum, reframe our standards around place-based learning.
Miss Moran, please.
yeah. So just to really echo the ideas of, reframing and unlearning, it makes me curious to know if a year one teacher has our book, will it indeed take them those 5 years to come about, or students who are instilled in their K through 12 experiences, if they're chock full of place-based learning and then they then go on to be educators, I don't think it will take the 5 years. I think we'll get it. So maybe the challenge now becomes getting our book in people's hands and in
Right.
That
programs
is a
to
really
help
good.
support bringing teachers in this methodology to begin with.
I totally agree with you too, Charity. I mean, we use the analogy in our book, or we talk about, how a student who is immersed in place-based learning in a school that is all place-based, they may be brand new to learning in that way, and but when they look to the left and the right, and see everyone else doing it that way too, it doesn't take them much time at all. It usually takes them about a month to figure out, like, oh, this is the way this works. And I think it's similar too. Like, I started out in an entirely place-based school, and that's the way I've taught ever since. Like, I didn't need to learn the traditional way to get it. And I think I was a pretty strong teacher pretty fast.
And I think once teachers see how place-based learning really builds those relationships with the kids, it energizes you. It's so much fun. It really is. And you're pulling ideas from the kids, you're from community partners, and it's just really, I mean, I think as a teacher, I know I was very engaged.
Yeah, I will make some comments. Well, first and foremost, Miss Moran, you're also a born seller. You're a really good seller. You made a very good point in terms of your book. I wanted to say that, and to me also reframing and on learning, they're very interesting. I think that's so important because you were mentioning, all of you were mentioning about the process, right? And right now, what we always think about conventional education, we always think about the outcome, right? The grade we get, right? But we don't really focus on the process. And really, life is really about the process, right? So it's all about the process, right? So and so that's why I find it so important to just reframe this, but it needs a new mindset really that we have to instill, from a top down, but also from a bottom up level, that we have to see life as a process and not as somehow an end, in itself, like the grade, right? And so I think that's really important. And you also mentioned that, like, the purpose driven, right? And that's really where intrinsic motivation can really, be developed, right? And that's, I think, what you do such a brilliant job when it comes to this book. And of course, and then about relationships, right? You talk about relationship, and again, it's really full circle back, which really is about connection, right? We want to forge relationships. And what I find it so beautifully that you really talk about that you want to cultivate community partnership. So talk a little bit about community partnership and how this somehow, brings people together and how it uplifts learning.
Well, there's so many entry points into community partnerships when it comes to planning a proper place-based learning experience. Um, from the thinking about the community that's around the school and its assets, thinking about experts either within the community or beyond who can be parts of and contributors to the process. And by experts, it doesn't have to be a certified and degreed engineer. It could be the grandfather who is always on the corner when the students are crossing the street. And he's lived there the entirety of his life and gone to school at that same school, so that he is more of an expert than any degreed personnel in that neighborhood. I promise you. So, those are just a couple of the ways to think about how we, leverage community partnerships and embed the students' culture into the community. I mean, into the projects.
Miss Sanchez.
Yeah, and nurturing those potential partnerships um, over a long period of time so that there's some longevity there. I mean, one gift that I think any school leader can give to their teachers is to start that community partner database early. And we have, a process for community asset mapping, um, whereby you just find out, like, what's the potential in the community. And it doesn't mean that it's aligned to a place-based journey. right off the bat. It may be, that you're creating this database, and then a couple years down the road, you say, oh, that hardware store that we contacted summer before last. They're saying they want a mural painted on the side of the hardware store, or we're going to reach out to them in some way. So just creating that sustainability by having a level of visibility that schools might not be accustomed to, because unfortunately schools have become, sometimes little islands, and they forget that they're a part of a larger community. So again, like really making themselves more visible in order to collect those potential community partners that then can be utilized over time.
So I think traditionally, in a way, doing school, we disconnect with the community. And really what this is doing is building that connectedness. And also in the whole process, it's really opening up different career pathways for kids that maybe they never even thought about. And so they're seeing people who look like them, who are doing this work in the community, who are passionate about it. So, it's really creating this new pathway for them.
Why do you think there is such a disconnect between usually schools and communities? Why is that?
I mean, the bulk of my work and study in Indigenous education tells me that was by design, right? Especially for our Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. And, so separating students from their communities means separating them from their cultures. At least, that was the intent, right? And in so doing, they just become part of the dominant culture. And so again, it's that indigenizing the curriculum, the content, and the methodology for teachers, and how liberating that can be as well, to reintroduce them to what's possible, when students really are not asked to give up anything of themselves, but can fully bring themselves into the classroom and have all of those assets appreciated and incorporated.
Miss Moran and Miss Evans, do you have anything to add on that?
I mean, no. I would just be saying the same thing in different words, and it's just at its core, um, busting through institutions that have been very intentional and ingrained. Yeah, very much so.
Tell us a little bit about why feedback, revision, and reflection is so important. And I believe he also actually pointed out, I think it was Confucius, that there are three levels of learning, right? One is through reflection, that's basically the best one. The second one is through imitation. And the third one is really through experience, right? And the last one is actually the hardest, right? But it can also be pretty lastingly, right, to some extent, right? But it takes a lot of time. So please tell us a little bit that, why you think that reflection, feedback, revision, and reflection is so important, but especially reflection, because you're also quoting Dewey, like the great educational philosopher, and so how important really reflection is in the process.
Yeah, because we can just go through life experiencing the same thing every single day, but it's not until we actually pause to reflect on what is it that I'm learning, how am I learning it, and why, especially that why, till it's only in those moments when the learning is solidified. Okay, repetition is the father of learning. We've heard that several times, right? But reflection is where deeper learning happens, where the actual lesson or solution or experience is solidified, when you can actually process it and think about what you're thinking and why are you thinking that. And so even like the work with teachers, there's tons of reflection because there needs to be, a lot of things, like we've said, that are going to have to be unlearned and unpacked. And at the very least, acknowledged to make sure that our experience is not coloring the student's experience. And then for students to be able to reflect on what they're learning so that they can then feel that same energy with the world around them, that they're only contributing and not detracting and causing harm and things of the sort. So it's just like thinking about your learning, but it's also at a more macro level, thinking about your being as well in the room, in the world, and in the room.
Mhm. And respecting students enough to give them enough time to work on something so that they can reflect. Um, it, it's not a luxury. It's a matter of respect. And uh, oh man, you got me started on critique and revision too, which you know, critique and revision is an equity issue. And if you don't have at least that one critique and revision cycle, somewhere in a place-based journey, then the students who have always been good at it will continue to be good at it, whatever it is, whatever the content is and the skills. And those students who struggle will continue to struggle. So the only way we get better at something is if we have more than one opportunity to work on it. And because the products and the services and the actions that students are developing side by side with a community partner are not the kinds of things that anybody is good at the first time. So, it just demands that critique and revision cycle. And then you've got something to reflect on, right? So it just becomes a necessity. I mean, if if there wasn't that critique and revision cycle, you'd be getting some funky work. Like it just wouldn't go very far. So yeah, Micki, you also I know are passionate about reflection too, and critique and revision. If you want to speak to that.
Well, and I think Charity talked about really builds those metacognitive skills for kids. And it's a way for them to reflect on not only what they're learning, but what they're learning about themselves as a learner, as a human being, as a person. And it allows them time to reflect on the process as well, so that they get better and better at it, or more and more comfortable with taking risks or failing forward, as we call it. So I think it's a really powerful tool. And when I was in the classroom, it was one that I would let go of because I didn't have time, right? Until I finally truly embraced it and realized we all need to make time for that, because that's what really cements the learning, um, and not only the content, but about themselves.
And I think especially now in this AI age, it's just fundamental because, of course, it's the easier one if you don't do revision, if you don't do reflection, because it's harder to measure, right? But when it really comes down to deep learning and the learning that is sustainable, learning that is life giving, and that helps to actually uplift and better our society, whether when it comes to social issues or just of becoming a better human being, it's really, really critical because the future is really what's really the new currency ultimately is really trust, building relationship with people, right? How we can trust, right? I mean, when you look at today, we have basically perfect models that imitate, human voice and so on and so forth. So ultimately, what comes down is, again, people are looking for authentic experiences, right? And that's what you're proposing, right? It's about authentic partnership, authentic learning, being authentically human, right? And really connect and build those kind of relationships that really brings us all together, whether it's indigenous method or Western method. Those two are not mutually exclusive. They are perfectly complementary, and that ultimately will just improve our society as a whole. We still have a long, long to go, of course, but this is one thing that makes me hopeful, and I want to have your take on that. What I find here in North America, we are very blessed because we have so different perspectives. Basically, the whole world is here, right? And everyone adds something to this mosaic, of North America, really, that makes our culture so much more uh, life-giving and fruitful. When you just think about what we can learn from indigenous method or other cultures and how we can improve our way of doing things, right? But I think it takes a lot of courage, and it takes the process. We have to put forward the process as educators. Now, the question is, how do we do this best? Like, how should I go about? I'm a teacher. I want to start um, place-based learning. What is the first thing that you would recommend me to do in order to start your outstanding work that you have written in place based learning, published by Solution Tree? And by the way, solutiontree.com. So please, if you listen now to this episode, go on solutiontree.com, type in place based learning, and then you will find the book and grab a copy, because it will change not just your teaching practice but also lives, namely the lives of your students. So please, what is the first and single most step to start implementing your work?
So oddly enough, we really focus on the individual, the teacher. And so we recommend they start with really kind of unpacking their own place stories, right? Where, you know, places that they connect with, how their cultural identity is connected to that place. And so, we encourage teachers to begin with their place story and keeping that as a lens as they move into implementing the framework around place-based learning.
Miss Sanchez.
Yep, I think we'd all give the same answer. So, you know, teachers' place stories, connecting with their own place, then mining the student assets and students' place stories, and getting that perspective of place from students who know their communities best and know it in a different way than educators do. And then gathering those community stories, through a community asset management process. And that's accessible to every single teacher, regardless of, the school environment they might be in. So it transcends any barriers that may come up for teachers in trying a brand new methodology. So it's really accessible to think about your own sense of place. It's accessible to be able to talk to your students. And we make the process of community asset mapping accessible as well.
Miss Moran, anything to add?
Check and check. Yes. No, you said it best first. Grab the book and dig in, because chapter by chapter, it's going to take them through processes, like everyone here has already said. And it has space for them to capture their thinking along the way. So, baking in that moment for teachers to reflect. So, implementation +1 to everything, and then absolutely considering the reflection along the way. as you're unpacking, as you're exploring the community assets, reflecting and thinking, where can you maximize that in connection to the content you're trying to help students discover, which is quite different. Earlier you said, I got to cover this in this amount of time. It's not about coverage. It's about exploration and depth. And that will always have bigger payoffs on every measurement system that teachers are held to across this globe. Depth is always a guarantee when you're with the place-based learning. So get ready for the depth is something else I would add.
I love that. And I just want to say that, I really like all of you three. I think I would love to be, part of your team. It will be so fun to have coffee with you three. I can tell you. And I really appreciate your work, what you're doing. And one day I'm sure we will meet at the conference or whatever, and we will have great fun, have dinner and
Mhm.
whatever. So much fun. So, but last question, really important, and I want to know what makes you feel alive.
So I have granddaughters. They really make me feel alive. Uh, family. I think also gratitude, always really holding the space for gratitude and how important it is, and really living in awe, taking a walk and not be thinking about, oh, the next chapter of the book, but to be looking around and going, oh, this is amazing, and making that connection. So for me, I think that's what really gets me. And of course, I'll add travel because it's so great to dive into different cultures and look at the world through multiple perspectives.
Miss Sanchez, thank you so much, Miss Evans, for sharing this. Beautiful.
Oh, goodness. Um, the things that make me feel alive are the same things that make me feel really tired right now. um, but it is connection. I think of the quote, "Only connect." Right? Like, we're put on Earth to love and connect with one another, and that really does give me energy and life and hope as well. Because I can be a very introverted person, as these two know, and got to be, pulled out of myself and my little world. And every time I do, I'm so grateful and inspired.
Yeah, I
I
love that. I
love
just
that.
want to jump in quickly. Completely feel you, right? It's the most beautiful thing to connect. But if you're more introverted, kind of, it's also at times energy consuming, right? And so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing,
Yes.
both of you. And last but not least, Miss Moran, what makes you feel alive?
What makes me feel alive is really ideas. It's three things. It's ideas, joy, and I'm gonna double down on Mickey's gratitude. I've started this practice every night at 9 p.m. An alarm goes off in my phone, and no matter the time zone, it's for me to write down or at least think about three things I'm grateful for the day. And even on the days when I literally am moaning and groaning and the 9 o'clock alarm hits, I'm like, oh, I need to find some gratitude right quick. And that really makes me remember, and it kind of connects to this idea of joy. Because if I can take anything and turn it into a lesson or something that I know I'll never do again, or maybe I'll do it again and again and again, then I can count it as a joy. And so that really helps me transmute some really crummy days and reflect and remember some really brilliant and amazing days. Um, so those two things, and then I just love hearing people's ideas, even if I know 100% that I disagree with them. It's really fun to listen to people as they think and share their thinkings and ideas. So I'm a collector of ideas and sunsets and sunrises. So those things help me feel alive.
So
Yannick,
now
how
I
about
want to.
you?
Oh, this is a good question. I think it's really similar to you, right? It's really connection. It's really the most simple things, yeah, in the morning. Just getting up very, very early and just doing my practice, my meditation, short meditation, maybe 10, 15 minutes, my workout, and having a shower and preparing, of course, coffee, and then just writing my journal, and just as you do too, just being, grateful for whatever I'm grateful for, what's my goal, what I love looking forward to, and my visions. Really, really write it down, and really reflect on it, and then I do reading, and then also I'm taking notes and just kind of dissecting as you propose, right? Really reflecting on ideas. It's one thing reading a lot of different books, but it's another thing of actually really dissecting them and deciphering its meaning, and how I can actually integrate it into my life on a day-to-day basis. I think that's really what makes me truly feel alive. The most simple thing, I think, the most beautiful thing to me in life is simplicity. And I think it reminds me of Arthur Brooks. He's at Harvard and happiness professor, basically, and completely agree with him, and I think we can all relate to that when it comes to happiness. Is And that's where spiritual growth as well comes into the equation. Is the older we get, the older we get chronologically speaking, but spiritually we truly get younger, and we truly start being more and more alive, and really find joy in the most simplest thing in life. And that's really coffee, reading a beautiful book, and talking to outstanding and wonderful human souls such as yours online, and really, help to kind of spread the message. So that's really about me, and I'm truly grateful for having you on the show. You're truly a gift to me and really to the world, and I can't wait to catch up, and hopefully one day in person, because this will be true connection, right? So now it's still a little bit, it's hard, right? That's exhausting, looking into a screen, right? If there is actually someone over there who is actually here and alive. So thank you so much. And sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly. I'm still terrible in pronouncing names. Micki, Evans, Charity, Marcella, Moran, and Erin Sanchez.
Thank you so much for having us. This was really a lot of fun and thought provoking.
Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Yes, I can't wait. Thank you so much. So beautiful. Micki, Evans, Charity, Marcella, Moran, and Erin Sanchez. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.